Welcome to Casual Watch Talk, the podcast from the Casual Watch Reviewer YouTube channel. Join us as we talk everything watches, from watch collecting, the latest horology news and interviews. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe on your favourite podcast app. Let's dive into the show. Hey, welcome back to episode 6. You're joined by Sam and my co-host Chris.
Good evening, Sam.
So, Chris, what have you been up to this week?
So I went and I took my Benrus GMT out of the watch box the other day, and I went to set the time. I let it wind down. It's my everyday watch. I'm wearing that probably 50-60% of the time. Took it out of the watch box, wound it, went to set the time, went to push the crown back in to the wind position.
Okay.
So you pull it 2 clicks out. Tried to get it back to the wind position, and I ran up against the threading of the crown. So I was like, okay. So I did the thing where you go counterclockwise, and if you guys are new to mechanical watches, this is the trick. Definitely do this when you're standing in front of a AD and you're about to spend, or you're looking at serious money watches. Ask them first. Don't just assume you can start undoing crowns. But anyway, so I start to slowly rotate the crown in the clockwise direction to find the threading, and I proceed to jump the date. So what has happened is the stem has not pushed all the way into the wind position. And so I was like, what am I going to do? So then I started to, so I found the threading and started to wind it in, turn it in. And then my GMT jumped. And I was like, oh no. So after fiddling it with a little bit, I found like the spot where the threading is the lowest. And I was able to set it and then push, stab the crown back in so that it would set. But I'm not super pleased about it. I think there's something that just needs to be adjusted. Maybe it's spring inside there's a spring inside the crown, I believe. The length of it. But if you make the length of that too long, it ends up kind of sticking out too much. So I know a little bit more about this than I probably should, than maybe the average, because of my, actually cutting stems and working with Seiko. But I said, okay, this watch is under warranty. Let's find out what the story is. Well, there's 2 repair centers for Benrus. One of them is in Miami. One of them is here in Los Angeles. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but 4 Crowns.
No.
Watch service center up in LA. No experience with them, so anybody listening has a crazy experience with them, get a hold of me immediately. But I think it's going to be okay. I reached out to them. Great gentleman on the phone. Talked to him yesterday. And sort of explained what was going on. So the watch was under warranty, and he told me, went over how to package it up. And for those of you who are not familiar with sending a watch in for repair, there's usually a very specific thing that they want you to do. Sam, you have some experience,
yes,
with that.
Yeah.
So did they have you do the double packing is a good idea.
Yeah.
The other good idea is to have a second copy of the label inside the box, so that you have your information as well as where it's going inside the box. So if like something happens to the outside, they can find it.
Yep.
Kind of double wrapped. So we went over that. They've got a 4 Crowns has got a PDF to download that explains all that. And like I said, so watch is wrapped up. Going to pop it in the mail, and hopefully we'll see where it goes. So this is my first experience with service of a major purchase watch. So
I didn't realize this was your new Benrus. When you were telling me about it, I thought it was your vintage one.
So this is the new one. This is the one that's under warranty. I've got the warranty card and everything. So Yeah, it's about a year and 3 months or so. So a little nervous, but we'll see. This is this stuff happens, and we'll get it covered under warranty, and hopefully, and I will share with you guys. I think I'm in good hands, and we'll send it off.
Yeah, and if everyone does have experience with that, you can contact Chris at Everyday Mastery. That's at Everyday Mastery on Instagram, or email into the show, which is thecasualwatchreviewer@gmail.com. I'm sure he'd be very grateful.
Yeah.
Before we dive into the news, two important topics. First of all, what watch are you wearing at the moment?
If you follow my Instagram, I did a fun candy. I had some like M&Ms strewn about my desk, and I was like, oh. So I'm wearing my Seiko, my modded Seiko Turtle. So that's the SRP 773, the blue Seiko Turtle. This is a long time watch for me. Basically got me started in Seiko modding. It has everything done to it. It's my version of the Ultimate Turtle. You've seen Sam's version. This is my version.
Well, I've got the Ultimate Turtle on, and honestly, I'm addicted to this watch. I never thought I would like a Seiko watch as much as this. Those hands that we put on it from that guy in the Netherlands, they're captivating. It's got the bevel on it. If you guys haven't seen this, check it out on the channel. We did a full video on creating this Ultimate Turtle, but I'm slightly obsessed with it. When I went into the office the other day at work, I did wear my Speedmaster, which honestly I haven't worn a whole bunch ever since I had it serviced and they nicely polished it. I kind of feel that it's like a precious object now, whereas I used to just throw it about before. Geez. I know it's awful, isn't it? It's awful. Know, it's right? Awful. But I wore it. I took it straight off the bracelet when it came back from the service center because they did such a good job of polishing the bracelet.
Right. You know, when I see it, you're like, I can't. No, I can't.
Yeah.
Or what you got to do is you got to immediately go out to the garage or whatever. You know, like scuff it up immediately.
No, I can't do it. And I've got it on a Tropic strap that I got from Watch Gecko. And anybody out there who's got a Speedmaster, for some reason the Speedmaster looks incredible on a Tropic strap. I know it's technically a dive strap on a watch that you can't even get it slightly moist at. But I think mine is a 30-meter one. I know the current ones are 50 meters, but the depth rating on mine was 30 meters. But for some reason, it just looks awesome.
I think I have the Uncle Seiko Tropic that I popped the Bell and Ross on one time, and I was like, geez, that looks great.
Yeah, it does a really good job, Uncle Seiko, of those Tropic straps. And then we did this last week, and it didn't get us in too much trouble. But I'm worried one day this is going to get me in a lot of trouble. But what has been your watch obsession this week?
So watch obsession. So I was watching some videos about sort of what's coming out, Basel, what people are talking about, and it just kind of rekindled some of the watches that I wanted to keep an eye on. So I don't know about you, but Sam, I got probably 3 or 4, and maybe we should break these out in like a separate show. But I've got like 3 or 4 that I have my eye on, and that I haven't been. I'm not going to go out and purchase anything. I just have my eye on, and I just keep an eye on. And so the watch obsession this week, the Frederic Constant Perpetual Calendar. So this is a full in-house movement, Frederic Constant. Now, I don't think I've ever spoken to Sam about his take on them, but we'll get to that. So this is basically retail about $8,000. This is a Swiss-made in-house Frederic Constant perpetual calendar, moon phase, dress watch. Pretty gorgeous looking for the price and for what you get. Our favorite gray market dealers, Joma Shop, has it for like $4,400. And so I just had the tab open in my browser, and I was like, oh, what's it going on? Let me take a look at Joma Shop. Pull that up and see what's going on. Because if nothing else, Joma Shop, I think that one of the YouTubers said the other day, if nothing else, Joma Shop's great for checking prices.
Yeah.
And so I just looked, and I was like, oh, it's 48% off, and I was like, oh no. But if you haven't seen it, the slim, I think it's the Slimline Slimline, Frederic Constant, perpetual moon phase automatic, 775 S4 S6.
I need to properly look at Frederic Constant. I know that they have an excellent reputation. I've never seen one that's really captivated me. But from everything I hear, they're fantastic. To follow on from yours, my watch obsession this week has been more of a brand. One of my neighbours, they're not big watch people. They've become really good friends of ours. We went to Vegas with them. And they've become obsessed with Tudor when I became obsessed with Tudor.
Oh.
Jen, who's the wife, she bought a very nice pre-owned Tudor. Lovely like champagne dial with the diamonds. And then Josiah, he's been obsessed with this champagne dial 41mm two-tone Black Bay. It's called the Black Bay 41. It doesn't have a bezel. So it's essentially like the Black Bay, but without the bezel on it. So it has this champagne dial, but nobody's got it. In fact, we went into Tonneau, asked for them, and they said, no, they don't make it. And he started phoning round, and it turns out that they do make this champagne dial. The version that you more commonly see is a black dial, so it's like a two-tone bracelet. He loves that Jubilee bracelet that comes with it. So he phoned round, and it's just that they'd never ordered it before. In fact, they don't know anyone in the US, and all the Tonneaus, which I think is probably one of the biggest, maybe after the Watches of Switzerland, dealers, they've never ordered one in the whole of all of the branches linked together, which is pretty fantastic. But he's also, I've got him slightly obsessed with Grand Seiko. He's, I think, a quarter Japanese, so it means something to him that it's made in Japan. And we saw the Grand Seiko, I think it was called the Summer Edition. And this watch is incredible. It's essentially the Snowflake Grand Seiko, but with this incredible green dial with gold hands and gold indices. This thing is just gorgeous. The only problem is that this thing is like $6,300. Now, I'm all in on Grand Seiko. The quality, unbelievable. Yeah. I would love spring drive. In fact, this one isn't a spring drive. This is a high beat, but I would love a Snowflake with the thing. But I just can't get my head around the pricing. I know it will decrease in value, and I told Josiah this. I said, look, this thing's going to go down in value, but the chances of it, especially the Japanese they're big collectors of Japanese history and things like that, aren't they? So in a couple of years, especially this summer one that's 6,003 limited edition with this incredible green dial, I'm sure it will go up in value, but in good conscience, I said to him, look, this will go down in value. And I'd love a Grand Seiko in the collection. I just personally can't get over the price because you're in Rolex territory. And the thing with Rolex is not only... There's obviously it will go up in value, Rolex. There's no question about that. But it's a liquid investment that you could easily sell. Now, you could sell a Grand Seiko, but it's not going to be overnight. You can't just throw it on Chrono 21 and somebody's going to buy it the next day.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
This is my other kind of thing with it. So I guess my watch obsession's been kind of Grand Seiko in general, I would argue.
Okay, all right, yeah, and one of the things that we should like to pull off here, like a couple of things. I was just watching something that where in one breath they were like, don't collect watches, don't worry about the money, don't collect them because they're an investment, don't worry about the money, if you love the watch, buy the watch, right? But in the same video, they kind of flipped around and they're like, well, at least with the Rolex, that you can turn around and sell it if the times get hard. And so, but I'm with you. I like it's such a conundrum. But what I think that we definitely should talk about is, if you heard the concept of the endowment effect.
No.
So the endowment effect is when you have this thing that's worth money. Right. And so you say, okay, I bought this watch. It's, $3,000 watch. Okay. It's, so you sort of have this thing in your mind where you say, like, you're like, oh, well, this is worth $1,000. So like any scratch on it, any dent on it, you're like, oh, $1,000. Right. But no one ever thinks about, like, when you go to sell it, like, all right, so how much time are you going to spend, listing it? How much time are you gonna wait for it to get the highest price on Chrono 24 or eBay or whatever? And maybe there's no market for that watch. For a lot of this stuff, the market is just not there. That's when I go back and say, okay, if it's something that you can afford and you want to enjoy, then there's no question. It's like, would you ever sell it? Like, so this, I'm looking at this, by the way, gorgeous. This green dial, this is great.
Oh, it's incredible.
And I think, is this looks like it's the high beat, not
the high beat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So not a spring drive, it's a high beat. Okay. But I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, it seems like he's got a little story to it, a little attachment to it. And if, it's like you're going to pick this up and it's just going to be kind of part of your story.
Yeah. The other thing I've got him slightly obsessed with, and next time I go to Bob's, which hopefully will be tomorrow at some point this week, I'm going to try and get all of the various different iterations of it. But I've also got him interested in, he's got a very particular taste. And as soon as I realised he was into this two-tone gold Tudor,
right.
I sort of got an idea of his taste, I made a beeline in this shop and said, hey, do you have a pre-owned root beer? And he loves it.
Yeah.
I mean, the root beer is such a distinctive watch, underrated, I think, in my view. It suits his personality perfect.
Perfect. Yeah. No, I love it because I think it's I get this way. I've not had that experience with watches yet, but I've had this experience with cars and wine, and I just love when you're around a table, you're tasting wines, and you just start to pick up on I have friends of ours up in San Francisco, and you just kind of pick up on, okay, this is what Vicky likes. This is what she's drinking. Why don't you try this? Okay, you don't like anything in an oak barrel. You like stainless steel. Have one of these, and and you're just it's a lot of fun. It's great.
Now we do have a main topic we're going to discuss, so stick around till the end. But as normal with these shows, I wanted to hit on a couple of the more interesting news stories from the world of horology. Now, last week, if you were listening in, there's always a story that I get passionate about. And last week it was the Omega with the 321 movement and the cost that they're charging for them. This week this is more of an amusing one, but Tag has made a watch that they say is celebrating the 160th birthday of Tag Heuer. Now, the thing that gets my back up is that Tag, to me, and by all, I've never owned a Tag. I know people that love Tag, and I've got no problem with Tag watches. I just think their marketing they're trading on a history that themselves don't have. They bought Heuer. Tag made parts for Formula One racing cars. Heuer had the history. Now, all credit to them. They saved Heuer from what might have been certain destruction. But Heuer has the romance of the racing. Steve McQueen, the image that Tag constantly uses of Steve McQueen gets my back up a bit because it's well known that Steve McQueen wore a Rolex and even a Hanhart watch with his... He wore a Heuer Monaco in the Le Mans film, and they did have some... I mean, he maybe collaborated on it, but Tag has been trading on this one or two images of Steve McQueen in the Le Mans film wearing a Heuer. This has been their entire marketing strategy for, I think, at least 30 years. I just don't believe it. I'm like, guys, come on. Yes, it's the 160th birthday, but of Heuer, not of Tag, and there's an argument there. But
yeah, a little bit, yeah.
So what's your view on that? I mean, this watch looks beautiful that they've made, but
yeah, no, it's tough. And so I'll say two things. So try to find another picture besides that very famous picture, Steve wearing the Monaco. Try to find another picture because I don't think this is just a small subset versus like other movies that he was in, and stuff that he's wearing. So it's interesting. Yeah, they definitely use that. I mean, that's in their catalog, I'm sure, right? I'm no doubt that's in their 2020 catalog.
Yeah, the picture that I have in my background of when I'm doing my intros in my apartment is of the Steve McQueen, and I took it straight out of a Tag catalog. I mean, if you think about, another incredible actor, Paul Newman, he wore that Rolex. There's countless images of it. There's even in one of his like publicity headshots where he's kind of hand on chin looking in
Oh
looking
yeah,
at,
yeah. Headshots. Yeah, I've seen the black and white
yeah,
stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Rolex
You're totally right.
proudly there. He wore that watch.
Mm.
Maybe also I should give Tag some credit because it's keeping the image of Steve McQueen alive in people's minds.
Yeah,
Where
certainly,
I
certainly,
don't know
right.
that there's a
Yeah.
lot of other.
And you're totally touching on that. There's that gray area that exists between you just won the U.S. Open and you immediately put the hat on and the watch on, just and get your picture taken, and and there's that line between brands that have that that sort of level of almost like sponsorship,
Yeah,
and then I know it's and certainly Tudor, this may be a controversial term, but the ambassador, but I mean a true ambassador for the brand, and maybe not in the way Tudor does it. More like, I feel like it's almost more of a sponsorship. But if you have someone who is like, there's a partnership there where it's like, I'm doing this racing with this wristwatch on. You guys say it can survive. This is I think it obviously has more value, I think as we can see through that.
yeah. I think that as it was a great point that you made about brand ambassadors. I think the only true ever brand ambassador I feel was Jacques Cousteau when he was doing those dive watches, because he was using that in the
Yeah,
he was
exactly.
in
Yeah.
the he was diving with those watches on. He's like, yeah,
Right.
I'm actually wearing this diving. Whereas Steve McQueen, he did race as well, but in that
Yeah.
particular image, that was his character kind of in the Le Mans film. It
Right,
wasn't
right. Yeah.
the Hoya was their whole thing with their watches was they made stopwatches for rally cars and
Yep.
things like that. So they did have that incredible history. Tag,
Yeah.
none of their instruments really. Yeah, they sponsor F1, but their watches that they've made aren't the instruments that were used for racing. And the image that they used in a Steve McQueen was.
I obviously have some experience. I know about them from rally. So I sort of precursor, like out in the fringes. I definitely see what they're trying to do, but my take that they haven't really brought that all together. So I think they're kind of struggling there to kind of get that together, and in this I think is more of the same, where this 160, well, the company and Hewer and.
So I've got two more news stories to go through, but before that, Chris and I are going to be doing this podcast on a fairly regular basis. If you want to support the channel, you can actually click on Anchor and offer a monthly contribution if you wish. But one of the things that we are doing to support the channel is having sponsors. So we're just going to pause quickly for a quick word from one of our sponsors. Welcome back. We've got two more news stories to go through, and then we're going to get to the main topic of today's podcast. So next story I had was all these stories today have come from Watch Pro, but this is that Benrus has been bought, or the name has been bought by an investment firm. Benrus, famous for creating military watches from Vietnam, the Korean War, World War II, and they still made outdoors watches. They had a very distinctive one that had the integrated lugs for the NATO. The lugs were actually part of the case. So I'm interested to see what they do. I've only seen one image of the watches that they're looking to create, but this is an old US brand, again, suffered during the quartz crisis. But I'm actually looking forward to them coming back to the market. What do you think, Chris?
Possibly. It'll definitely. Do we have any? We have no news for. I mean, I see a selection of watches. Any news on what part of the market, what price they're gonna enter in?
No, I mean, Benrus was kind of affordable adventure watch, but it seems like there's a couple of different models on there. I've also seen they were very much military aesthetic or kind of outdoorsy type watches.
Very Hamilton sort of feel, almost a Bremont feel. And Bremont's obviously a newer company, so maybe infusing a little sort of modernity into it. So yeah, interesting look. It'll be interesting to see where they fit. I think right now with stuff that we're seeing, the Kickstarter, the stuff that we're seeing out of Asia, that like just absolute saturation on the, sort of under 500. So if they hit the market in the 1,000 to 3,000, I think there may be some room for them.
Yeah, and then the final story before we jump onto our main topic is, and this is a bit of a funny one. For a long time, there's been this argument that Hublot copied Audemar's Piguet with their Big Bang. Jean-Claude Biver, I think he was at AP, and then he created Hublot, and he really built Hublot to what it was. But his argument is that they both follow a porthole design in the case. However, now Hublot on their Big Bang have created a version with an integrated bracelet that could make a very passing resemblance or make a more stronger resemblance to the AP Royal Oak. So, and I know you're actually I'm not a fan of integrated bracelets, but I know you are a fan of integrated bracelets because you've got one on your watch. But what do you think of this whole Hublot AP kind of, the battle as long as time, it seems?
So it's interesting because I think I was just reading something on the Benrus BR05 with the integrated bracelet. I think everybody just finished sort of exasperated in the way that like, oh, it just looks like this, it just looks like that. Who was it? It was a Blog to Watch. Aaron over at a Blog to Watch had a great article on, and I think the point here is, listen, there is a space for integrated bracelet sports watches. That's what people want. So whether or not you are making a copy, or you were the first to, or it looks like this, or you know what I mean, I feel like, listen, if you're gonna make an integrated bracelet sports watch that's amazing, come on down, enter the space. I mean, Hublot is not going to be directly competing with some of those brands, whereas Benrus is not.
Yeah.
They're down in the 4,000 range, and this is, I'm assuming, looking at the pictures. 17,000 pounds. Okay, you get 19,000 for the ceramic. Not my cup of tea. Usually not. I'm not a big Hublot fan, but I think I think maybe there's market there.
Now, let's dive into our main topic. Now, Chris, this was something that you wanted to have a conversation about.
What I want to do today is just let's talk about watches that were inspired by military inspired watches. And I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff that I sort of looked into, fascinating history in a couple of areas, and we can talk about all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I originally got into watches, that military watch aesthetic was something that really appealed to me. I had a CWC watch. I still have it, actually. You can see it in my collection review that the British military wore kind of from the 80s onwards. I even had I've bought and sold countless watches. And once they go, I never look back. I never regret selling a watch. I've never really rebought a watch that I've sold before. But one of the only watches that I ever regretted was another CWC mechanical one I had, and I sold it before I realised the joy of mechanical watches. So yeah, I started off very much with that military, a love for that military watch aesthetic.
So you have a quartz CWC? Is that what you got right now?
Yeah, the affectionately one called the G10, which the form that the
okay, the small. Okay. So this is interesting. How we kind of got talking about this, and we'll wrap around to CWC. Just for our listeners, when we say military watch, a field watch, military inspired, or a field watch. So that field watch aesthetic is typically with the numerals, with Arabic numerals all the way around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 12. Often with 24 hours marked out as well. Also typical with the style is the ability to hack seconds. So hacking seconds so everybody can synchronize your watches. Very important. That is sort of a basic. Now, these watches, you mentioned G10. I started here too. Khaki King and the Khaki line, very inspired by these.
I think one of the interesting things is if people listening to this are interested in those early Hamilton watches. You just mentioned Hamilton, and Hamilton did supply to the US Army. That market on eBay, those vintage Hamilton, it's toxic, that, because, well, for a start, Hamilton never printed Hamilton on the dial as far as I'm aware, or they might only have done a handful of ones, but you see them on eBay. Somebody is aftermarket printing these on Hamilton. They're coming usually from Vietnam. I had a Hamilton expert on the channel, Josh, who fixes Hamilton full times, and he won't go near those military Hamiltons. Yeah, so just to keep an eye out to everyone.
Yeah, so if you do any these G10 watches, and going maybe a little further back, I don't know if you've heard about this, but the term, the Dirty Dozen, the original 12 watch manufacturers who were in various parts of the market and still are. Some of these brands, you have IWC, Omega, Longines, etc. Some of these brands have still around. JJ Lecoultre. Some of them have come back.
Vacheron.
Vacheron. Vertex, I think, is making a comeback.
Yeah, Vertex makes some. Yeah.
So you've got all these. So what happened in the war? You've got all these brands that were maybe in different parts of the market making different. Just like today, you might have, you can go get a $200 something, or you can get a $2,000 something, and that all stopped. And they said, listen, you need to make military field watches for the infantry, and this is what they're going to look like. Period. And they had a standard. And they all look, little differences, but I mean, just like, if you, a Boeing versus, a McDonnell Douglas, it's still the same plane, but, little subtle differences. And it's fascinating. So, we'll put a link, definitely, but, these, you can see these original 12 watches. A couple people have collected them. And there's another one where I would do not go onto eBay and try to find some of these, because
you're giving me those images of the British military commandeering those Rolls Royces and turning them into tanks.
Right. Yeah. Just melting them down but.
I like the idea of military. I love that military watch aesthetic. I like it if they have supplied to the military as well, but. I mean, I mentioned CWC, but one thing I will say, CWC, they sold to a company called Silverman's, and you can still buy them today, but honestly, they are absolutely taking the piss with the pricing now. It's obscene what they're charging for those watches. You're looking at $300 for the one that I had, which is like a 34mm acrylic crystal quartz movement that was standard issue to a lot of the British military, and the SAS watches. I would love to add a dive watch, a CWC dive watch. The quartz ones, they're starting at like £899. It's absolutely obscene to be charging that much for what is a utility watch, and I think a lot of people would really like to own one. But I think this was an interesting conversation about military watches I had with Chris, who was the naval flight officer. He was saying that when he joined the Navy as a naval aviator, he never got issued a watch. So I asked him what watches they did use. I assumed he would say Marathon, because Marathon, one of their marketing things is that they supply to the US military, and I think the Canadian military,
Canadian,
maybe
Swiss made, but Canadian, Canadian company.
And he said that no, they weren't issued one of them, so he kind of went off and got his own watch. He was using Citizens and then later Mega Speedmasters and stuff like that. But it's certainly an interesting part of the market. I like military watches. I personally would steer clear of the vintage ones because I just don't know much about them. Do you have any military or have you had experience with vintage military watches? Or
That's definitely. So you mentioned Marathon. We should talk about them. Let's finish up with CWC. So part of their branding or part of their marketing right now is they were the ones that replaced the Rolex mill sub. Interesting because like maybe Rolex at that point was like, we don't, maybe we don't need these contracts and we don't need this money, so we'll give it to someone else. So yeah, I'm sure when that happened, these were, $12 or something to produce, or just no money whatsoever. And so I definitely get your,
They're beautiful looking. The Royal Navy one, they reissued a mechanical Royal Navy. England has special forces, but also it has the Special Air Service and the Special Boat Service, which I guess would be like Delta Force or something like that in the US. And they made a PVD watch for the Special Boat Service. It looks incredible, but the pricing is
a little too much for you.
It's not just that, it's the fact that at one time I was buying CWC watches off eBay for $45 a piece, and then suddenly they've kind of traded off the CWC name, and I feel like it's a gouge. Now, don't get me wrong, I buy luxury watches. But if the watch doesn't seem like it's good value for money, which, they're putting ETA quartz movements in watches, but charging £300 for them.
They had the one that I was sort of most interested in. They had their not the heritage reissue, because there was a lot of marketing in there, but just their current Divers Mechanical, £750. But here's my reservation. Mineral crystal. Okay, ETA movement, Swiss made, fine. I get it. Little reserved for the crystal, but what I do like is they give you 3 lume options. So you can get it in vintage lume, you can get it in day glow, you can get it in white. And I was like, oh, this. No, that's just apparently that option's only for Chris. That's the.
Yeah, it's funny. The watches look awesome. I'm sure they're very well made, but considering a few years ago what you could get them for, now I'm sure somebody would be thinking, well, you could buy a Rolex in the early 2000s for a fraction of what you pay now. But the thing with the CWC watches is you're not going to be able to. It's not an investment. It's a utility watch, and it should have a appropriate pricing, I think. But
anything but Rolex, I guess I'll give and I'll certainly repeat this again on the channel here, but when I buy anything used, just take 30% off the current price. So if it's currently available, so a good example, WC, if I was going to look for this on eBay, right, this would have to be $480, for it to make sense, because that's what you would be able to maybe sell this for.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. They are good watches, but if you think about that section, that area of the market, it's so competitive as well.
Right.
I mean, they must be selling them. Their Instagram is very lively, but the Hamilton khaki, I would say, if you like that design. Also, Jimmy Collins at Collins Watches makes that military aesthetic. The guys at Veya Watch, they made a Dirty Dozen watch with the small seconds. Omega they've reissued their 1948, which I believe was their military, or certainly has a lot of military aesthetic to it. It's certainly an interesting part of the market, but I guess servicemen these days would probably be more akin to owning G-Shocks or Citizens or
Special Forces, SEAL team. Yeah, it's going to be G-Shock all day long. Something that you can get gasoline on and not have a problem. And just,
I'm trying to think of the bigger brands, the luxury watch brands that have an association with the military, or at least have that as part of their marketing. With the exception of Marathon, I'd say that Zinn is. They have a Navy SEALs, do they? A Navy SEALs watch?
Yep. Zinn does. Just because I'm a fan of the brand, and you'll hear me say this all the time, Benrus has the French Navy. So they do a couple of special editions for them.
Yeah, and then the other one, of course, and I think they got in a bit of trouble for this, or at least they probably deserved getting in trouble for it, was Bremont. they made RAF watches. Now, I know Citizen actually made an awesome Green Berets, British Commandos one watch. But anyway, Bremont made an RAF watch that was to commemorate the armed forces, and that thing was like crazy money. Nobody, you could argue that the people that it was celebrating would struggle to justify paying that much for a Bremont watch. It was more celebrating people who could afford the watch.
Now with Bremont, isn't Bremont the brand that has the ejection seat watch? Have you heard about this, Sam?
I'm familiar with their military aesthetic ones. They also have a fairly decent dive watch, and then of course these like special editions. But I haven't heard of this ejection seat.
So there's
watch.
An article a couple years ago. So apparently Bremont sold a watch or sells a watch that for military, for like test pilots, and if you have pulled the ejection seat, which probably is going to break some ribs. If you pull the ejection seat on an aircraft, they apparently will replace the back of the watch with a red, sort of like a red surround. Maybe a couple years ago, this story came out. I'll dig it up for the links. But it was like you can't. The only way you can get this watch is if you pull the ejection seat. And by the way, like I'm interested in the jets and pilots and planes. Like you don't ever want to do like pulling that is like I want to crush some ribs and break my spine. That's what that is.
While we're on Bremont, we can make this a separate video. But have you seen that? My own view on this ridiculous collaboration with Ronnie Wood from the Rolling Stones.
I have not. I guess I should.
What they did is
they
got Ronnie Wood, who is an excellent musician. They got him to paint dials of a watch, right? So he was on tour with the Rolling Stones, and he's hand painting each individual dial.
He's doing it?
He's painting the dial. They're putting it in one of their Bremont watches, and they are knocking these bad boys out for 50 grand because they're saying they're art pieces. Now, one thing I have to say about Ronnie Wood, this is my own opinion, and art is subjective. I love modern art, I love pop art. Art is totally subjective, but he is not painting beautiful scenes on here. It's not, Modane with like color expressions. It's not like I've got a Damien Hirst watch with a very distinctive look. I mean, some of these, honestly, I feel like somebody with a Sharpie could recreate this on a dial.
I just pulled them up. Sort of simple, like there's ones with a bunch of colors on it, but very the designs they look sophomoric. They don't speak like this is an art piece. I mean, again, subjective, very subjective. But I just pulled up pics, and you should.
We'll definitely put a link in the show notes. We'll definitely put a link in the show notes to these Bremont watches. I'm sure some people would love them. Yeah. To me, they've essentially taken quite quite a intricately made design sort of dress watch aesthetic, and then put a dial on it, which probably is akin to like street art, would you say?
Very Swatch. Yes. If this came out as
awesome on a Swatch,
it would be amazing, right? But it's very their style. It's like taking that Swatch style where it's like, we got a guest artist and they did a pattern, and then we made 1,000 watches out of it. Well, if you're like, okay, well, this is a fun quartz watch that we can pick up for, it's great. But when you start getting into the like art piece that's $50K, then you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, and you wonder whether, I mean, maybe posthumously it might go up in value. I mean, if I for a long time was trying to hunt down the Keith Haring Swatch watches, which unfortunately Swatch do have some incredibly valuable watches. The Keith Haring, he was a very famous graffiti artist in the 1980s in New York. If you've seen his patterns, you'll know that distinctive sort of, he had a sort of stick man type drawing. He made some swatches, but the problem is that swatches are made of plastic that degrades, and you can't. People might not know this, but that's one of those swatch. The swatches is a swatch is a sealed unit. There's no repairing it. If it's broken, it's broken.
Yep.
It's broken. So we went off on a huge tangent.
Tangent, yeah, tangent, great. All right, so let's get us back on. So we'll switch from Swatch and we'll talk about Marathon or Marathon, how you pronounce it, Marathon. Canadian company, Swiss made. I held one of the jumbo divers. So they make this 46 mil jumbo diver quartz. It's like, what is it, 300 meters. Oh, I'm surprised only 300, right? I mean, like, I picked this thing up. They don't even list the weight on the site, or I couldn't find the weight on the site. I mean, this thing, when I picked it up, I was like, this has to be powered by like a chunk of plutonium. These are purpose-built military tool watches. And I mean, this is the kind of watch where you're like, you're stranded on an island and you have to, bash rocks together with your watch. I mean, it is like this thing, I'm sure would have no problem like hammering something in and still run fine. Pretty amazing pieces, heavy duty. If you like that that sort of G-Shock military purpose tool watch. I mean, it definitely, for me, I'm a tool watch guy. It definitely speaks to me. I don't think I could pull one off, but it's definitely that brand.
Yeah, you joke about the plutonium, but they do have versions that have the tritium tubes on, like ball watches. Yeah,
and they're not afraid. I know. So I was thinking about this. They are not afraid to put the radioactive symbol right on the dial, and so I'm thinking like you're cruising through TSA with your Marathon on, and they're like, sir. But what I thought about was like in that situation, the TSA probably is wearing one or knows what they are, So,
yeah, and that distinctive bezel they have on them, you can tell that was purposely made for if you're wearing like tactical gloves or something like that. I mean, there's no. Yeah. I mean, with the best will in the world, there's no turning the bezel on my Tudor Black Bay 58 with tactical gloves on or like a wetsuit on.
Yeah, I mean, you could have space suit gloves on. So back to the Dirty Dozen, a lot of, Sam mentioned, a lot of these companies have done reissues. So I personally like to get a modern watch inspired by. I think we're too far away from that vintage. I mean, these are, my grandfather was in the Navy, so that means that these watches are they're ancient
and tiny.
And for you, right, and to find one when working and parts, I mean, definitely if you're into it, absolutely, chase that down. But I'm really interested in this sort of reissues, and you mentioned a couple, Omega and etc. The original ones all made the same stamped WWW on them, which very military here, which stands for watch, wrist, waterproof. so wristwatch or watch, wrist, waterproof. So that's what you made. And if you look, we'll again put this link in here. They've got some of the estimated production numbers, and even though every company was making them for the war, we're still talking about 10,000 pieces. There's no way that they all survived up until this point.
They had to be returned as well, didn't they? The servicemen, I don't think after World War II could. I mean, unless they smuggled them out, I don't think they could. The watches were.
Quite possibly. I don't know if they had to be, or they could be purchased. But yeah. So only like Omega, and a company called Record was made over 20,000. So pretty cool. I'm starting to see that aesthetic with the small seconds. Do you like small seconds watches?
That's a great question. Do I like small seconds watches? I think I do like small seconds watches, but it depends who's doing it. I don't like Oris on that big dive watch that they have. Oris
okay.
Aqua
the Aquis, yeah.
Aquis,
no.
Oris Aquis.
Yeah.
where they have like the small seconds off to the side. I think it looks good on a military watch. I don't like it on bigger watches.
Okay. Okay, so it's gotta be smaller. A lot of them used tritium on the dial. So the circle T for tritium. Tritium half-life, I think 12 years. So or I think it's like 9. I could pull up my physics class here. So yeah, after about 10 years, it's half the brightness, and then it's half again the brightness. So these are actually painted dials.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's tritium's better than those poor girls that were painting the radium dials for the World War II clocks, and they got that. I think that was the first ever sort of class action lawsuit against a company by employees, wasn't it? That horrendous like cancers and stuff that they got from the radium. But I don't think, I mean, I think that was around World War II. I can't think of. I mean, there definitely is watches that use radium, and I think I've looked into this, and there's certainly not enough radium to cause you any medical issues if you wear a radium watch. But I mean, it's funny because everyone goes for that old radium look now, don't they? That faded to peach.
Radium is radioactive for a lot longer.
Yeah.
Think like 200 years, or again, don't quote me, but the dust that comes off can actually contaminate. So like opening up one of those watches, super dangerous radium watches. So
well, I suppose a watchmaker repeated exposure, I'm imagining,
right,
would probably build up. So that was a really thanks for that, Chris. That was a really cool discussion on military watches. If you've got any comments, guys, you can email the show, emails directly at thecasualwatchreview@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on other social media, Chris has got his Everyday Mastery Instagram. My Instagram is The Casual Watch Reviewer. And of course, if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, head on over to YouTube and search for The Casual Watch Reviewer. You'll see the logo there with the wood behind. So, Chris, thanks again for joining me. End of episode 6.
Thanks, Sam. Always fun. Enjoyed it.
So, guys, join us next week where we'll be another host of news and subjects to talk. As always, appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk. Thanks, guys. Bye.